Okay, I think it's synced up now. But welcome to another week of Mental Health Wednesdays. We have another special guest this week for our discussion. I'm gonna allow herself to introduce who she is, what role she plays at our school, and let's go with hmm, what is something fun that you're gonna do this weekend?
So my name is Miss Emily. I am our elective film teacher at Blanca Alvarado. I also have the pleasure of helping Mr. S in the math class in the morning as a support for him. It's a lot of fun to be with the fifth grade math class. It is my first year at Blanca, though I have taught film before. And fun this weekend. Actually, it's my birthday next week, so I'm going to go snowboarding. I'm very excited. I think it's going to snow, so very excited for that.
Thank you, Miss Emily. So we're gonna jump right into it. This is a pretty big topic. I mean, this whole section of discussion topics, every single one is pretty huge. But do you want to do an overview of the video from today, Miss Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought that it felt like time and it felt important around March to talk about grief and loss because a lot of students over the last 3 months have been talking to me about the grief and loss that they've been feeling around family members having passed away, lost opportunities, or just loss in general, whether it is having left school due to COVID, moving due to COVID, maybe their parents had job loss. All of these are considered events that happened in their lives that would invoke grief. And so I talked to our students in the video about how loss happens. It is basically something inevitable in life that means that someone or something has been taken from you. And when you have loss, you can experience grief. And grief is the overwhelming emotion of sadness, but also you could feel anger, regret, guilt, and fear. And so over the next month, I thought that it would be good to talk about this because it's not too early to talk about grief and loss. And I think that a lot of parents and family members don't know how to talk to their young ones about death. But death is really important to talk about because it is a natural part of life. And also, if we don't talk about it before it actually happens, then it's harder to deal with when it actually does happen. And so that resonated with a number of our students who'd filled out the survey and ones that had attended Learn with Miss Lar today. So today I just went over a brief kind of definition of what grief and loss is. But next week, we're going to be talking more specifically about the death of a family member, which a lot of our students have seen in this community due to COVID, but also other reasons. And then loss of friendship, and then change, just because change is loss too.
Yeah, thank you, Miss Laura. So yeah, as mentioned, this is a pretty big topic. I really appreciate you outlining the differences between what grief is and what loss is. And I think you went even further about talking about the emotional symptoms of grief in terms of like shock and disbelief, sadness, feeling guilty, being angry, and maybe even scared and having some sense of fear. So I think those are definitely different points that are definitely valid. And they all feel and sound differently as well. So yeah, I mean, it's not. I'm not going to sugarcoat. It's a sucky situation to have to go through those things, but I think growing up, I think developmentally as well, like we're going to have to tackle those things at some point. So having those conversations is pretty important early on. So Miss Emily, I'm curious if there's anything that you want to comment in regard to all what has been said.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind when I looked at the lesson for today for the students was about how you experience different emotions, not just grief. It's not just like you get news of a loss and then you feel grief, whatever that feels like. It can feel sad or it can feel mad. And I lost my grandpa last year, and we're not sure if it was COVID related, but he had a heart attack, and it was really hard for me. I remember the moment of shock. I remember reading a text from my mom, and the text didn't say that he had passed away. It said he was in the hospital. And so we didn't even have all the information. And that's also a confusing part of what's happening right now, especially with COVID. if your family member has to go to the hospital, you might not see them again. And it's a really, really tragic way that things are working out. So for me, what resonated was the shock part. I just sat down. I kind of had to calm myself from breathing. I didn't feel like crying. I didn't feel like talking to anyone. I just was kind of silent and had to calm down. Um, and then I got sad later. It actually took a long time for me to start feeling like I wanted to start crying. Um, and then I went through kind of a period of not really wanting to talk to anybody. I actually just kind of wanted to be alone. And I think people process really differently. I'm the type of person, I kind of need to go through it by myself before I can even, jump back into normal life. So I did have to take some days off from school, and I have a really awesome team that was able to help me do that so that I could have time with my family. But I think it's really, really important to ask for the space that you need, even when you don't know what you need, actually.
Mhm. Yeah, if I could piggyback off of that, is that grief is universal and individual at the same time. And it's so interesting that we all experience grief and loss, but that every single person deals with grief differently. Some people bring up the 5 stages of grief, and we know them and you can Google them. But in reality, there is no set time for grief. There is no specific stage that you need to go through each one for weeks. You don't even have to go through them in order. You don't even have to experience all of them. The only one that really kind of happens with everybody is acceptance when it comes to grief. However, between the actual loss and acceptance is like a roller coaster, and it's different for every single person. So I appreciate you sharing that experience, because some people want to talk about their grief, some people don't. And it's painful. So why push a painful experience to be experienced the way that you think it should be experienced when other people are experiencing it very differently?
Yeah, I definitely also want to add to that. And thank you for sharing, Miss Emily. I think for me, it makes me think of kind of some of the things that I've gone through, some of the challenges and trials that I've gone through with loss and grief. And I think when I lost my dad out of the blue in the middle of high school as a sophomore, back then I don't feel like there was an awareness and understanding of mental health in general, as it is today. So I mean, we always talk about it, Miss Laura and I, at the very end of our sessions, but we really mean it when we say, um, don't hold back and put yourself in a corner where you're not receiving support or resources or tools when you're seeking them out. You're not alone ever. There are people that want to help, different resources that they want to provide you. So I think that's really important. I know sometimes there are things that might hinder your ability or desire to seek out those things. For me, I think a lot of, we talked about culture, for example. I think culturally for my family, um, and just I think a lot in the Asian community in general, um, we kind of have this mentality to put our heads down and get to work and move past it. But um, although that might be great for some people, it's not always the foolproof type of a solution. So I think for me, that was the case for my family, and I think I'm still paying the price in that regard. Even today. There's a lot of things I hold back and don't share all the time or have issues with. I mean, I will be very honest with you. There are moments like randomly a song comes on, I hear something, or I see somebody that resembles my dad from behind. Even like if I see like someone's shoulders or haircut, like sometimes like people like that looks like someone I grew up with. Um, and I get emotional out of the blue. So sometimes that just comes back and it just hits you real hard. So those are challenges in that regard. So I think, it's very important that you reach out and seek out support if you need it. I think it's also important, Miss Emily, I think you talked about like others um, trying to help you out. I think for me, there are some friends back then that didn't make the best decisions.
Hmm.
And the words and actions they chose to speak and do. Um, I think at that age too, it's a little bit different as well. Being a teenager, I think there's a case that just the first thing that comes to my mind is a girl that I had a crush on and she was trying to help, but then it became a game of like comparing how many deaths they've experienced in their life, and I was just, okay, that's not really helping me at all. I don't know what the point of this conversation is, but I think it's important for you guys to also communicate, for all of us to communicate. If you want support, like how can you best support me or you? You know, what does it look like? What does it sound like? I think it's important to have that conversation, and you know, if it's out of your comfort zone or out of your expertise, it's totally fine too, and just being honest about that.
If I could expand on that a little bit, it's that um, especially in high school and even as adults, if we don't talk about grief and normalize what it is to lose someone and how it might feel, is that we might say the wrong things, do or say the wrong things. When you're experiencing grief, even though someone may have also experienced grief, it's very personal. And it's, if you don't know what to say or don't know what to do, the best thing that you could say is, I am here for you. If somebody doesn't want to talk about their grief, it doesn't mean that they don't miss someone or didn't love someone or aren't ready. We can't insinuate anything about how people are grieving, including if they're crying too much or not crying enough. It's just, we can't really name what other people are going through with their grief if that's how they're currently processing it. You could definitely be there to help. But those feelings that come with grief, anger, sadness, guilt, regret, the only thing that could make you feel better and not feel those things is if that loved one or that lost thing comes back. Is that going to happen? No. So therefore, those feelings can't really just go away or feel better if that's the solution. It's like, what would make you feel better right now? Nothing. Thank you. It can be really angering because the thing that you want to feel better isn't going to come back. And so what we need to do is sit with those feelings and work through them instead of casting them away. Try to make your friends laugh. Inappropriate, don't do it. It's not a funny thing that someone's, we need to learn this sooner rather than later, or else you're going to make these mistakes in middle school, high school, or adulthood when people start losing other people. So it's serious, sensitive, sentimental, personal, and because grieving can be so uncomfortable for other people, to watch somebody grieve, it's just let them grieve. It doesn't have to do anything about you and your grief. It's about their moment to grieve a person or an opportunity or anything else that was lost. I see Miss Emily is shaking her head a lot, so I'll pass that to you.
No, just for every person is different. I love what you said about it being universal, but also individual at the same time. And another important thing is just like, you can never know what another person's going through. And there's tons of sayings that are cheesy about that, but you can never know how important somebody's pet was to them or how important somebody's great aunt was to them. Even if it seems that's not as important to you, it could be affecting them really differently. And just, gosh, the other thing that's coming to mind is what a year for loss and grief. There's so many things that have changed about our world, and things are looking up, I think, and a lot of good has happened for me despite the loss. I actually lost my job due to COVID a year ago. And it brought me to Alpha. So there's not always a silver lining, but luckily sometimes there can be. Sometimes it is a matter of one door closing and another one opening, but I know it's not always the case. Like, it doesn't always end in a happy ending, like you're saying. Sometimes you just have to feel the feelings that might be uncomfortable. And things will get better. Like you said, the acceptance does come, and it might come short, it might come long. The timeline can be different for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, it's kind of the sentiment that I was processing in my head too. I mean, in education, we talk about a positive mindset, a growth mindset. And I think to elaborate more on that, I think focusing on and honing in on the things, the celebratory type of deal of what that loss was about, rather than just like the opposite end of it, like there's loss, it's over, da 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 da. I think honing in on those things is always a helpful thing to be able to focus on, because at least I think for me, the other case and scenario could have been where I could have grown up without a father, for 16 years. That's the opposite end of things. In all truth, I'm no matter how tough and how hard it was, I'm incredibly grateful for um, my dad having him, all the things that he portrayed in his life, and all the different valuable things that he's taught me, his kids and wife, and so honing in on that was really important for me to get past those things. So I'm just curious, what both of your thoughts are in terms of, again, we all tackle these things differently. I'm just curious, what has helped you, whether it's from yourself or for others, to tackle some of these challenges? Where have you shown growth mindset, positive mindset in those um, hardest of challenges?
Mhm. I can go first, Miss Emily, and then if you want to share, is that I hear what you're saying, Mr. S, for sure. That's what I'm going to be talking about next week around coping skills with how to cope with loss. Is that gratitude is one of the most important tools in moving forward with loss. It's to say, I had this person for this long, which is amazing, and this is what they were able to contribute to my life, and recognizing all of the different ways that even though you've lost something, there could be a way to move forward with the loss still happening. So for example, we have students that move schools, move countries, move cities, and they feel so much loss when they move. And that loss could take a while to process and to feel, and it feels really awful. Of course, pain is always difficult to feel, but if that they can recognize everything that they had gotten from their life in that time at that school, in that city, in that place, and then apply it to where they'd like to move forward in their life. So gratitude is an essential part of how to cope with any kind of loss.
100% agree with that. I've tried to start a daily practice of writing down 3 things I'm grateful for every day. And at first it's hard. I've done it before. At first it's hard, and then it becomes really, really easy to just come up with just little things even that you're grateful for. When I think about what helps me in times of hardship, especially related to loss, like I mentioned, I needed time to myself. So it was really important for me to be able to advocate for myself and ask for boundaries, which is really hard to do. I had to say, I need space, or I'm not ready to talk. And those are hard, they can be hard things to say. Um, Also, everybody is experiencing it differently. So I had different feelings than my mother did, because it's her father who passed away. So she maybe wasn't ready to talk about it, or maybe she was very ready to talk about it and I wasn't. So once people have gone through their initial emotions about it, like things can be there can be some commotion, disruption in your life, especially if it's with your family. But afterwards, I find it really helpful to seek support from others, even if it's not directly related to the loss, even if it's just, let's prioritize having dinner together, or let's prioritize doing this activity together, because there is a loneliness that can come with grief. And like you said, okay to feel all the feelings, but not to go so far into despair, I guess, where you feel utterly alone. So really important to still have people in your circle, whether they're your friends or your parents or your teachers, to be able to engage in the social things that will keep you energized and not feeling alone.
Mhm. I think alongside that is this remembering that you are here, you are alive, you have a life to live, you have things to look forward to. I think that can be one of the thoughts that you have out of grief, is that you're like, oh man, like I still have this life to live. My life didn't end just because somebody else's life ended. And um, this is why grief is such a sensitive topic. I think it's hard to talk about grief. I'm gonna be honest, we actually had fewer students fill out the survey, and I wonder if it's because this was a difficult topic, because grief brings up pain. So who wants to talk about a painful thing? Obviously less people. So, but it's really, really important because we're talking about it in a way that I think is practical, it is logical, it is helpful, and it's not painful because we're not grieving something necessarily right now. Not to speak for everyone here, but it's easier for me to speak around grief because I'm not experiencing grief right now. In our survey, actually, about 40 students of the ones that had filled it out said that they were currently experiencing grief. Currently. There is something that they have yet to process. And so it might be harder for them to talk about because they're experiencing it, which is why actually I do think it's important, because the sooner we talk about grief previous to a loss actually happening, the more you're able to deal with it when it actually does. So that you can name that you need space, that you can name that you're ready to talk about it or you're not ready to talk about it. And so I appreciate all of our students that very bravely showed up by checking in and doing our Mental Health Wednesday survey, watching the video, watching us now. And also, we don't force people to talk about grief. We don't force people to get over things. We don't tell them, talk about this or else you didn't really miss this person. What are you talking about? That's not true. It just means I'm not ready. And so this is a painful topic. It's a wonderful topic. It's an inevitable topic. And I think that I feel a lot of privilege talking to you both about it right now. And I hope that our students feel safe when they're ready to talk about it with us. Because I think that's how we're going to go back to the school year, is that we're going to be back whenever we're back in person, you're going to see someone and you're say, hey, how you doing? And that person might be thinking, not great. I lost a lot this year. And it's hard to be back, or I wish I were home. And so I definitely want our students to learn how to hold space for what's going on with everybody else and keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that we have you, Miss Lar. Like, we have this awesome resource, right? We have a trained professional here to help us with that. So our students just should absolutely be taking advantage of it. I'm so excited that, obviously not excited they're experiencing grief, but excited that they feel safe enough to disclose it with you. And, you know, they should know they can talk to any of their teachers about it, but especially a special space with you too.
Thank you. How you doing, S?
Good, yeah, and it just makes me think of this is kind of towards the end of your video. You just to elaborate a little bit more. I think self-awareness is the thing that comes to mind. You talk about space, you talk about time. Time is continuous. It's not going to stop. It's going to keep flowing. So those are, could be different indicators of where you are in terms of your mental health. And also you mentioned physical health, some signs of physical health where, grief and loss can really hit in those categories. So I'm just curious if you could elaborate a little bit more on that as well.
I would say that the very first one that's most commonly experienced by people who are experiencing grief and loss is lack of appetite. Food goes out the window. So culturally, many cultures, after a funeral or after a loss, even after like you lost your championship game and people are like, what are we going to do now? Let's go out to eat. Like, food is really important to our cultures. And after a passing, a lot of times people bring food to the family because they don't have the energy to cook, but also a lot of people don't even eat when they are experiencing grief. They just are so much in their feelings and not in their body that they don't feel hunger. And so lack of appetite is a very common indicator that you are experiencing grief, especially for a long time. People can lose a lot of weight with grief. And so whether it's your parents, your grandparents, aunts and uncles, someone that's pretty common. And so we want to regulate our bodies, make sure that we're being in tune. If you see someone who is grieving, who is not eating, not drinking water, and they're crying all day, not getting enough sleep, sleeping too much, these are very gentle ways that you can help take care of someone who's grieving, is just reminding them to have a small meal, drink some water, get some sleep, wake up from their nap and go on a walk. So these are pretty important. I don't know if that resonates with either of you, but I have definitely seen people grieve very recently and they just forget to eat. And we want to remind ourselves to take care of ourselves too. Because like I said, we are still here.
Yeah, it makes me think a lot of things, honestly. Back then, so we lived in a two-story house, and I remember, man, after everything that happened, I think for like a month and a half, in terms of my mental health, I think it was just
Mhm.
like everything seemed numb for me.
Right.
So during the middle of the day, I'd catch myself and I'd just be sitting on my bed, like looking into open space. The house was never that quiet. Everybody was in their own room and just like we didn't do anything. We didn't go out. If anything, just for a restroom here and there. We none of us ate at all. So that completely resonates with me with, having a strong support system. The families and friends that we had that would come over to just visit and check on us because I mean you never know. If you think about a person, you may look at them, they may seem and look fine, but you never know what's going on inside their head, in their heart. So like people can look at our house and it looks, nice, clean and whatnot, but we don't know what's going on inside the house and we were just sitting around there. So I definitely agree with that sentiment, having a good, strong support system, and having not only just for mental, but again, physical health. Sometimes we kind of neglect those things, whether it's intentional or not. But it's important for us to stay healthy in that regard too, in all categories.
Mhm. I don't know, Miss Emily, if that was something that you saw happen in your family. Was this kind of really into the feelings? So the physical health and like the thoughts maybe are like numb and quiet. But they're definitely around loss, you could be so consumed by emotion, you forget the other things like the physical health and the mental health. And so that's very common regardless of culture, I think.
Yeah, food is a big thing for my family because my grandma was a cook. She worked at a school, and so she was a cook for like 50 years. So she needs to be busy all the time. She's constantly cooking, and that's like her way of showing her love. And so her husband passed away, my grandpa, and she was still cooking. And I don't think a lot of people were eating in the same way. I think people would eat because they thought they needed to eat her food, like that she was making it, and so they needed to eat it to show that they like respected and loved her. But no, it didn't feel healthy. It didn't feel like a healthy way of approaching appetite. And I do think that my family kind of wasn't thinking about health, physical health at that time. I do know there was a lot of naps. There was a lot of kind of taking it really slow and just feeling the heavy feelings was making, I know just from my aunts and my mom, just feeling really tired and especially in the quarantine, it's been a weird time to grieve as well because we haven't been able to go out and do as many activities. So we have been
Mhm.
mostly at home. It's been a weird space to be in when the room that you're in is supposed to be a space for you to be safe, but you've been quarantining. And so kind of the energy of the grief can stick around. And in that case, I know that like lighting a candle or opening a window actually can like literally changing the air can actually help you feel better in your space as well.
Thank you for that. I'll keep that in mind for next week when talking about how we have not been able to grieve normally. If people have not been able to cope the way that they normally do, like being able to go outside, or if everybody is home and so you're around a lot of grief, or if even capacity for visiting the loved one because of travel has been restricted. I will keep that in mind that that is very COVID. It's very COVID circumstance, losing someone in this time. So I appreciate you naming that.
I'm sure you will talk about it next week as well too. But I think we mentioned it in other discussions too. But sometimes we can be our own enemy as well. And I think sometimes holding all of our grief and loss to ourselves and not that you have to break loose at a certain time or place or anything like that, but holding to onto the burden of those things and
Right.
not letting yourself navigate through it can be very harmful. But yeah, those are things that are obviously discussing a big topic like this. We're gonna have to unwrap, unpack, and kind of discuss throughout the next month or so. So thank you for having all those different topics lined out for us, Miss Laura. Looking forward to talking about more. We appreciate our guest, Miss Emily, yet again for joining us,
And
especially
thank
for
you.
the topic. Yeah. But last but not least, we want to remind our students, again, Miss Laura is available if you want to talk to her. If not, you have different sessions you can attend, whether it's a group therapy type of deal, the office hours, and if you're not comfortable with that or whatever it may be, there are tons of resources and tools that she can provide along with your teachers and staff. Not only that, make sure to check out our full episodes on our YouTube channel, as Instagram only limits us to our 10-minute clips. But make sure to follow our YouTube channel and our Instagram and share these conversations not only with folks at school, but have that dialogue with your friends and family as well. So it is still kind of these special circumstances. We hope everyone is doing well. We miss you, but we'll see you again next week on Zoom virtually.
Cool. Yeah, everyone. Thank you.